Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. You're welcome to today's education collaborative session on maximizing employer engagement for sustainable higher education institutions, career development, and employment services initiatives for their stakeholders. And today, our stakeholders, you're looking at students and industry practitioners. We are super happy and excited to have you join this session today. And we look forward to having a very fruitful and engaging session with you. It's not going to be just us talking. You're also going to be talking and sharing with us today. And we are really excited to hear from you all. So today we are going to be learning from each other because no one institution is perfect. And so we hope we can all share, support each other to grow in this field that we are in and collectively have a greater impact on the continent. By way of introduction, my name is Abigail Welbeck. I'm the Director of Career Services at Ashesi University. And Ashesi is a private university here in Ghana, West Africa. We have a mission to educate a new generation of ethical and entrepreneurial leaders in Africa. We want to cultivate within our students the critical thinking skills, the concern for others, and the courage it will take to transform our continent. And I have worked in Ashesi for this year's 10 years now. I work with an amazing team of career advisors, and our department, that's Career Services, we handle student career development as well as connection with industry. So that's me for you. And today I'm super excited to be presenting with my co-presenter. He'll introduce you.
Karoli Kolkonyi. My name is Karoli Kolkonyi, the Director of Careers and Alumni Affairs at Kepler. Kepler is a non-profit organization working in partnership with Southern New Hampshire University to provide students in East Africa with access to accredited American degrees through their innovative competence-based program, which is offered online. So Kepler pairs the online program together with extensive support services, which include in-person coaching, financial support, but importantly, career preparation to make sure that graduates are able to apply the skills they develop through the Southern New Hampshire degree they work on online. So I'm a proud Southern New Hampshire and Kepler alumni because I went through the same program, and I've worked with Kepler since 2017, supporting students career preparation, transitions to the labor market, but also engaging with the alumni network to make sure that we are still at Kepler. We don't only support students, but after graduation, we continue engaging with them. So together with Abigail, we are really excited to lead this session today to create a platform to share best practices. Before we go any further, you might be asking yourself right now, what is employee engagement? When you look at the title of this session, how do we maximize employee engagement? So when we talk about employee engagement in the context of education institution, we are talking about how do we involve employers as our key partners or the customers who will take the products, the graduates we are trying to train. How do we involve them in their learning journey to make sure that we actually have relevant curriculum that meets their demand, but also we create an opportunity for students to interact with employers to make sure that they actually get information on what is going on, like the reality on the labor market. So, and then we will also talk about how do we maximize engagement. So it's one thing to engage with them, but how do we create systems that is the process of engaging with them? So in this session today, we will share insights on how we have conducted employee engagement, drawing from our experiences at Ashesi and Kepler, but also drawing some of the experiences from the pre-session form that that we shared with the speaker. So let me call on my colleague to share with us, when we talk about employee engagement, where should we start from?
Thank you very much, Caroli. So we're going to look at where should we start this conversation from, even before we go into the nitty-gritty details of how to go about it. There has to be some strategy and planning that sets the platform or the stage for the rest of what we're going to talk about today, right? So the first thing we're going to look at is, why do you, as an institution, right, you should understand or begin to think about, why do you even want employers to help you? What is your institutional mission and vision? And how does employer engagement fit within that, right? What is it that you want employers to do for you? What do you want employers to do for your students? What kind of experiences do you want them to bring to the table? What kind of knowledge do you want them to share with you? You want to also think about, who is your top employer, right? So you've thought about what you want to get from employers, how it aligns, how that strategically aligns with the mission and the vision of your institution, right? And you have to be very clear as to what that is. And then also you have to define, who would you say a top employer is? I mean, is it an employer who hires this number of times, who engages in these number of ways? To you, who would a top employer be, right? And then also we talked about, what are the desired learning outcomes, right? What kind of experiences and knowledge do you want them to bring to the table to support student learning and student learning outcomes, right? Think about what the development plan for the institution is, right? And how employers are going to fit within that. We also want to look at how would employers benefit from the partnership. A partnership is a two-way street. So yes, you're also going to benefit in terms of what they're bringing to the table for your students and for your institution, but you also have to think about, how are they also going to benefit, right? They're also thinking about their, productivity on their end, and making sure that they are getting, if it's not even money, time, they're getting what is worth their time, right? So you want to be able to outline all those things very quickly in a way that it helps the whole institution to understand how to align with employer engagement.
Thank you, Abigail, for setting a foundation for this discussion. So the question when it comes to employer engagement is, and also how from even the pre-session, like how top leadership in different institutions or in your institution really invested in employee engagement? As I mentioned earlier, employers are really critical customers for education institutions. They play an important role in supporting students' career preparation. They shape and also give direction to the goals and the missions of different institutions. So employee engagement therefore must be a combination of efforts across the entire institution, starting from the top leadership. So with that, we need really to have top leadership buying into the idea of employee engagement. And with this, we need to make sure that we have really smooth employer engagement. We need to make sure that leadership is really open to invest or to allocate budget to run the projects related to employer engagement. So budget allocation is really key, because there's one thing where we said you can talk about that you are engaging employers, but you need to have a budget which is allocated to employee engagement in a way that you have people who are in charge of running. These are staff members you need to hire. The campaigns you are running, they need resources to be invested in, but also support systems. Sometimes employee engagement, depending on the size of your institution, you might need to set up specific systems that help you or to ease the process of engaging with employers. So you really need to have a budget, and this should be also Your budget should also be something you think about, especially as my colleague is going to talk about outlining the key performance indicators, but you should also reflect your budget to the goals or the OKRs. So it is really easy for you to identify, let's say, how much money you want to invest to allocate to employee engagement.
Thank you. So as Carly has mentioned, the budget is very critical to everything that the institution does in terms of or in line with employee engagement. There's a lot of there are a lot of things and initiatives and programming that would require some funding of a sort, right? And so one of the ways institutions leadership can show investment in employee engagement and that they are on the side of employee engagement is by allocating some funding or some budget to that. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to present a case of Ashesi, right? Ashesi has key performance indicators as an institution, right? This is what I'm showing on the screen is an example. It's an older version, but just to give you an example, right? It gives you an idea of what the institution is running with each year. What is at the top of our plan, right? And so one of it is achieving good or excellent in our learning goals. And by way of context, our learning goals are a set of competencies that we have collated in line with industry needs, right? As to what we want to incorporate in terms of skill sets and competencies into our students, and what a student should leave Ashesi after 4 years with, right? So with that information, what we do is everything that we do in Ashesi is strategically aligned to those 8 learning goals. Everything that happens in the classroom, outside of the classroom, right? So everybody's hands are on deck concerning this. And the institution says that. And so what we do is for our internship evaluation form, the questions in the survey to ask employers to rate or to give an evaluation of our students' performance at work, we have grouped them in such a way that they are speaking directly to each of these learning goals. And so what the institution has said in its forefront is that we should achieve good or excellent in all 8 learning goals. So when we pick the survey, we collate it, we should see that it's collectively showing good or excellent. So it's an institutional KPI. It is not just a department's goal, but it's an institutional KPI, which means that this kind of employee engagement is very critical to the institution. It is starting from the top and starting from the leadership, right? So this is how, for us, Ashesi, that's how we present it. And the second one, this slide is also giving us an indication of that, right? So for us, we survey our graduates post-national service, because Ghana has a 1-year mandatory service where the government posts you somewhere. So we survey post that, right? And our target as an institution is that we would hit 90% or above for the career placement rate for our graduates, right? And so it's, once again, it's an institutional drive, so that all efforts are speaking towards it, and it's communicated from the top. And it's not just coming from a department. So it once again emphasizes the importance and the relevance of employee engagement and just employability initiatives generally on the campus.
Also, when it comes to employee engagement, the top leadership should also be open to support with strategic communication. There is having a team in charge of employee engagement, but sometimes you need another hand to help to make things speed faster. I would give an example. Some organizations have a bureaucratic system in a way that if you want to talk to someone, you have to go through really a long channel. So sometimes you need support of top leadership to bridge that gap. So instead of me, for example, sending out an email to, let's say, trying to get an organization which like a company that most people know, maybe MTN. I'm hoping you have MTN, for instance, in Uganda too. So maybe for me to send an email to the CEO of MTN, it might really, because of the senior, like the levels, it might take, they might take a long time to get back to me. Maybe if I contacted, let's say, one of our top leadership to send them an email. That might speed the process, and I'm breaking some bureaucratic barriers along the way. So leadership should also be willing to lend a hand in that. But also, when it comes to employee engagement, institutions need also to show that they are actually fan of the work of industries or companies that you're working with. So top leadership should also be open to accept the invitation, let's say, for example, to attend, let's say, and work on anniversaries for different companies, sending out strategic communication like thank you for contributing to our work as an education institution, but also participating, let's say, in the panels, the panel discussion, talk show, to engage with employers to make sure that there is really, they create awareness and also visibility of education institutions. So now, before as Abigail mentioned at the beginning, before we set up this session, we sent out a form to actually learn from the participants and other institutions that are participating in this workshop today, to learn how are they engaging with employers. For example, how are the top leadership supporting in the process of engaging with employers. So I'm calling on Abigail, is going to take us through this.
Thank you. So the pre-session form showed, and rightly so, you know, that's one of the major challenges of most institutions when it comes to employee engagement is funding, right? Financial constraints. And the pre-session form really also indicated that. So we're going to share a few resources and information in terms of what we think could support in that regard. I mean, we have different kinds of institutions here today. We have governmental, we have private, we have public. Like they're different along the spectrum. So I guess each of you would have to tailor whatever information we present to your specific institution and see how you can begin conversations with the units or the people within your institution who are responsible or could be responsible for supporting financially around employee engagement initiatives. So first of all, we're going to put a link in the chat right now, and it's from UConnect, right? And they support with resources around things around career services. And so the specific one that I want to highlight is a webinar. There are different webinars. There are different webinars that give insights to different. I mean, there's one that looks into the role of career services in post-secondary education, career services for underrepresented and new populations, leveraging campus partnerships to expand resources, how to leverage labor market insights in the career center. So different things, but the particular one I want to highlight concerning this specific subject, the funding, is there's one that says gaining buy-in from senior administrators, because it's okay to understand the necessity of a budget, but you need to know how to communicate it to the people. I'll say the powers that be within your institution, right? So this particular one, gaining buy-in from senior administrators, will give you an understanding as to how to communicate effectively to the institutional leadership or whoever's in charge to understand the necessity for employer engagement and begin to think strategically around it and funding it, right? So the link is in the chat now. Please copy it and save it and be able to refer to it later. I also want to give you some ideas of how to create funding channels, either as you're waiting for the budget, because sometimes, I mean, getting a budget is a huge deal and it may take time. So like Carolee mentioned earlier, let's put, as we go along and identify the needs of our institution, let's put it in short-term, medium-term, long-term goals, which will help in discussions following the convening, right? So maybe, I don't know, look at your institution and see where that falls. Does it fall in medium, long-term, short-term? But usually it will take a bit of time to get the budget and start to put the money out. But while you wait, or if there's still no budget, there are some examples we wanted to share, right? Some institutions have a partnerships office or an office that handles engagement with employers or with external stakeholders, right? So, I mean, you can look at how that office can support in bringing in some funding for employee engagement, right? And also look at certain services, right, that you render for employers that you can put a little price on that, right, to support what you do. So for example, employers are really big on how can they expand or enhance their employer brand on campus, right? You can have, for example, a student newsletter. They want to be in the face of students a lot because students are their target, right? So if there's a newsletter or something that students run, how can you put some price to it so that employers have to pay to be on that? How do you give them opportunities to enhance their brand on campus and put some pricing towards that, right? If you think of career fair, just general attendance, if you have a career fair, I think most institutions have that, right? And you can charge a little fee as a general attendance fee, but also you can look at sponsorship benefits, right? Where employers pay specific amounts to assess specific benefits for the career fair, and then you charge for that as well, right? Employers sometimes want to support in donations, resources, etc. But I think the mistake some of us make as institutions is we don't communicate. First of all, we don't open up platforms that make it easy for employers to do this, but we also do not communicate to them the needs that our institution have. Some of them may have, for example, CSRs that are in line with specific projects that we may be running on campus, right? If only we will make that information available to them and give them an opportunity to support, they would. So think also about how is your institution communicating needs, project needs, etc. to employers and giving them the opportunity to be able to support. Somebody may be able to support, let's say, building of a hostel, but somebody may be able to support something smaller, but give them the opportunity to say what they can support with, right? And if you have something specific along the lines of employee engagement that they can support, absolutely. One of the great areas too that need support is internships, right? We understand the need for internships, but sometimes employers are not able to support interns, and then the institution also is not able to. So you want to think of one of the things that we did in Ashesi, I remember, is we communicated. So communication is really key, and we're going to talk about it a lot in this session. We communicated to employers the need, if you don't have money, stipend to put in their pockets just for them to spend, at least support meals and support transportation, because there may be students who genuinely want to take part in the internship but will not be able to because they don't know, they wouldn't have what to eat. They can't even transport themselves to your organization. So I remember at one employers forum that we had, when we explained from that perspective, they immediately felt like, oh, we actually didn't think about it like that, because they thought, oh, we are doing you guys a favor. Why should students ask us to pay them? That's for some employers, Mm-hmm. So also think of communicating clearly to them in a way where they understand the essence of some of the things that you're doing alongside them, but also collaborate with bodies like Education Collaborative, right? I know Rose mentioned something about some funding to support collaborative works across institutions that I think they will announce on Wednesday. Join such groups where you can get some funding to support what you're doing and to make it easier to handle employee engagement across your institution.
So we would like to pause here and invite anyone from the audience who would like to share additional or any other creative strategy that his institution is currently using to raise more funds, so other participants can learn from the institution.
For me, I like the points you've raised. I have sat in the development office before, so I think the main areas you're talking about today are within the development office, which also holds the career office in many universities. Mm-hmm. It's a very new area for a lot of African universities, I feel. And so, I liked what you talked about budget, because I just put a comment that budget is intentional. You have to want it, you have to empower staff, I feel, because a lot of the staff in higher education may not be able to understand skills specific to higher education. So even as they speak to employers, I find they cannot tell their story clearly. I don't know if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. Because that employer is not going to feel sorry for you because you need jobs. That's the mistake I have found. it's for you to influence that employer to consider you in their next year's budget, in their next year's strategy, because they're creating a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. And I think sometimes careers office will fit in the 12 months to 24 months strategy, because of internships. You want the internships, you want jobs. So you can't be in the 5-year strategy because that's too far. So how do you influence the directors, the senior managers, for example, in a bank, to consider you when they are creating internships, to come to you? So that's my experience. So it's a really new area, and I want to challenge institutions across Africa to strengthen that area, especially the administrators. I have felt the administrators are the people who have been left behind. You know, universities are doing everything, they're putting money. But the question is, do your administrators understand, you know, do they have the map, so to say? You know, do they have the map? Maybe they know where they want to go, but they don't have the map. So how do you give them the map? Do you partner with another institution that is doing extremely well to help them, you know, break down, you know, that map? Or do you work with a firm that supports them, a consulting firm that may be good in, you know, some of the areas? So perhaps even those are the things we can discuss, because I don't know what the answer is. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lillian. You're absolutely right in mentioning the fact that we need to communicate our needs, right? We shouldn't assume that even for the institution, like that's why we are all here having this conversation, is who in your leadership may not be in today's session, but may need to hear this information. And how are you communicating? And that's why we shared the earlier link about, you know, gaining the buy-in of the senior administrators or leadership. It's the communication that comes with it, right? Understanding that it's not okay to just know that, oh, we need it, it's important. Be able to communicate it to all the stakeholders, even externally to your employers. So thank you. It's a very good point.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bigel, and also Lillian, for supplementing on that. So you might be asking, like, when we talk about employee engagement, do you have like a sole unit that is in charge of managing employee engagement? So though employee engagement must be a combination of efforts across different departments in an institution, the management of employee engagement should, it's really good to have a unit or a department which is in charge of employee engagement, to make sure that there is accountability for the projects, but also it is easy to track and also conduct the reporting around employee engagement. So we are going to share our experience from Kepler and also Ashesi, and for us, maybe drawing from experience we have at Kepler, the careers department, it's a sole department which is in charge of overall engagement activities. Even though sometimes, depending on the objective of the engagement, we sometimes collaborate with other departments, as I'm going to elaborate in the next slide. So, but before I elaborate on that, I'm going to invite Abigail to talk a little bit on how Ashesi is actually, even though they have a career service department which is in charge of engaging with employers, but how are they also collaborating with other departments, for instance, the admission team?
Thank you, Carolee. So yes, like Carolee mentioned, Ashesi Career Services is the main hub that looks around employee engagement and manages and gives accounts and reporting and everything. But we work very, very critically with all departments across campus, right? With faculty, with other administrators. We have a student advising unit that we are part of. But we also work with units like admissions, right? So admissions has, they collaborate with employers, right, who want to support students through funding, through scholarships, financial aid. And so that is one way where, for example, it doesn't completely sit in career services, but we work with admissions, and we know the organizations that are on that and who are supporting the financial aid or scholarships to that. But so there are different ways. I think what we want to show here, there are different ways where even though it's important to have a unit that is handling it, that you can still work across the institution with various units to support employee engagement. So this is how Ashesi collaborates with the Career Services collaborates with admissions to support students' financial aid and scholarships.
Similarly, on the side of Kepler, the careers department collaborates, let's say, with academic team on specific project. For example, when we want to seek feedback on the curriculum, we work with them to engage with the employers, because however much we are in charge with them, there is specific information and how they want to structure the communication with the employer to make sure that they get the right information they want from the employers. But also, giving an example, recently we were working on trying to get practical case studies from different companies which could be fused into the curriculum to make sure that we make sure that the curriculum is really practical for students. So we worked with our academic team to make sure that we engage with employers to get those practical case studies. But also, we work with the communication team, for instance, to help when it comes, let's say, marketing events, when we want to share the updates about the Kepler, which I think is the same case with also Ashesi. But also, we also work with the communication team, for example, to actually feature our employers, let's say, highlighting key employers and how, let's say, our graduates are performing from those respective companies. And moving forward, as we have been doing, we also conduct from the pre-session form, we also learned that some of the key findings we learned in relation to the key challenges that most institutions are facing is still financial constraint around how to run employee engagement, but also having the unit or the department which is in charge. So basically, it's more like not having enough funds to invest in the team which is in charge of solely in charge of employee engagement. So
okay,
we are hoping that some of the recommendation that Abigail shared in the previous slide can also help, and also resources which were shared can also help in terms of getting funding that could be helpful in running this institution. But also, I think, Abigail, you want to add on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Carolee. So just a bit of context. I realized we didn't quite explain the pre-session form. For those of you who are not able to look at it or fill it, is we asked a couple of questions that are in line with the topics we're sharing, the sub-themes we're sharing today. And for each of them, each institution explained what their stance was for that particular one and what challenges they were facing. And so we are picking from that to explain the challenges and giving some solutions in terms of how you can go about some of the challenges that were there. So one of the challenges for this particular point on which unit is handling career services was also that somebody mentioned about the challenge of leadership and management not understanding the essence of career services enough to be able to set up a unit for that, right? And I think what we wanted is two things. We're hoping the webinar recordings the link we shared earlier would be helpful. Just have a look at how you can go about communicating. Once again, communication is critical. You can't assume that because we all know it's important, then leadership should know, then it should happen. There has to be conversation, right? And also how deliberately are you taking advantage of campus-wide platforms like maybe a town hall meeting, or to communicate the essence of career services, right? Obviously to leadership, but also leadership to the rest of the institution, because I think somebody also mentioned the challenges about how other departments, especially faculty, don't understand the essence of employee engagement, career services, career services handling employee engagement in that way. And so it was important to be able to get leadership to buy into that, and for leadership to communicate downwards to everybody within the institution, so that you are not fighting that battle on your own, but leadership is behind you, and even implementing structures that enforce good employee engagement within the entire institution, but also communicating on platforms, campus-wide platforms that help to support that communication. So we're going to go into, I think this is what a lot of people are really curious about, is how are institutions engaging employers, right? And the more diverse, the more ways that you look at engaging employers, the more opportunities and channels you open up for student learning, for them gaining experiences and knowledge, and impacting student learning outcomes and their career growth. So you want to think, we're going to discuss what are some of the ways we are doing it in our institutions, and then maybe we'll have somebody else also share anything we have not already talked about that you think is really insightful for us. So the first one is we're going to look at experiential learning. Okay, and for Ashesi, for example, we have the internship program, which is not mandatory. It is mandatory for our engineering majors. They should have done at least one engineering internship before they graduate, but most internships across for Ashesi, they are not mandatory, but they are highly recommended. So usually you will get a student doing at least 2 internships before they graduate out of Ashesi. We're also looking at job shadowing opportunities, right? So experiential learning is how can students learn while they are doing or experiencing and learning at the same time, and it's very important, because whatever they learn in the classroom is not enough. They need to be able to put it to practice, and once they put it to practice, they begin to see the gaps and begin to fill in the gaps. They feel, they learn, they relearn, they unlearn. It all happens when there's practical learning, right? And so it's very important to look at. And for us, we think of internships as, if I am not able to do internships in my first year, which a lot of times is the case, at least after my second year, after my third year, I should do internships. But maybe there may not be enough platforms for experiential learning whilst a student is in the 4-year program. So what other opportunities and platforms can you create for students to understand what their career ambitions are, to fine-tune them, to get experience, to get support, to get guidance and counsel, right? So we created job shadowing. Job shadowing is for our first-year students who, because for one reason or the other, they may not be able to access internships. They get a 1 to 2 week, or even sometimes more than that, opportunity to engage with professionals within industry. And it's just for them to learn foundational career competencies. How's etiquette at the workplace? What does it look like? So at that point, that's what we do. We have a career mentoring program that is for a year, where we pair students with professionals in industry who are in careers that they are careers of interest to the student, right? And then these professionals guide them, right? Give them counsel, guide them, give them some practical learning opportunities as well for them to learn. Informational interviews where students can set up meetings with professionals within their fields of interest and ask questions about the professional's career journey, what they can learn from that experience, what skills they can start looking at building now. So that kind of support, like a myriad of platforms around experiential learning that students can take advantage of and begin to ask questions and get answers, right? And be able to fine-tune their career goals.
Thank you, Abigail. Another way we engage employers is also having them, or you can call it classroom or academic engagement. So basically what we do is we invite employers to come and speak to students, let's say in classes. Depending on the field of study, we have them as people who have first-hand information on what is going on the labor market. So students can get this information at really earlier stage. So, and also it gives them more insight on what can they do as students to make sure that they can really have a successful career, but also talking through on, let's say, relevant skills and how they can navigate, like help them prepare or learn those skills needed. But also, maybe drawing from a specific example on one of the things we do here is inviting employers into the presentations that students are doing. In one of our, before students graduate from Kepler, they have to do research. So they choose a specific organization they want to conduct on research on, depending on their field of study again. And then after conducting this research, we invite employers, specific, most especially those ones where students have conducted the research from, to come and listen what students have actually, what students found from their research. But also, I think this is something also, Abigail, which is really something that Ashesi has also done, is in a virtual site visits. So this is something we also do at Kepler, but before, let's say, when students are doing internship, we would go and visit the company, learn how is the internship, for instance, going, talk to the employer and also students, get their experience, talk through the challenges they're experiencing, and then try to customize the support, especially for those ones who might be facing some difficulty while doing their internship. But for Ashesi, they have moved actually these discussions with the pandemic. They have moved this discussion to remote. Abigail, do you want to shed more light on this?
Yeah, so our site visits are having conversations, right? It's not necessarily tours in the organization, but it's more of having conversation with supervisors and then with the interns to see how the internship is going and how we can come in and support with that. So, and we've taken it virtually as well. So that happens virtually, but the virtual also helps us to assess international employers as well, which we would not have been able to do if it was physical site visits. Thank you. Okay. Another way to look at engaging employers is career development events, right? How are you making events visible to them and even inviting them to be a part of those events, right? So we know of career fair, where we have employers come to campus, or virtually. We've had to do it virtually for 2 years. Ashesi did its first virtual fair this year, and I think we'll talk about that in a minute. But looking at how, obviously, to be strategic with career fair in engaging employers as well, having them to come to campus as guest speakers. We've talked about how they can come to the classroom, but also for out of classroom career development sessions, right? How can they come as guest speakers to speak and run workshops for students on specific topics, interview skills training, how to write a CV to attract an employer, etc. Right? It's very key that, because we're doing all these things so that students are going to industry, bring industry in to be a part of that process, right? Networking with students, have opportunities on mock networking engagements where students can practice networking with employers and get feedback from employers as well as to how they're doing. What about competitions like coding competitions, business challenges? It's all about how to bring the industry to the student as well, to get them to learn practically. We've talked about how the student can go into industry, but how can the industry also come into the classroom and outside the classroom to engage with students and give them the skills and the competencies and the opportunities they need to explore their careers.
Another way we engage with employers is also seek feedback on different set of things. One, we seek feedback, let's say, on the degree programs. I know we are going to shed more light on how we are actually engaging with employers to seek feedback in details in a few minutes. But we also actually engage with them to seek feedback, be it on students, when students are doing internship, let's say, to see what skills are students really demonstrating well, which areas can we reinforce to make sure that we better serve the interest of the employers. So we do that, but also we work with them to get to understand what has been the impact of, let's say, how we train students, as I said, the skills, our alumni, people have gone through our programs, how are they performing? So we can get that information to inform our curriculum, to make sure that we are actually addressing the labor market skill demand or needs.
Thank you, Carolee. So we mentioned institutional support, or we mentioned financial aid earlier. You also want to think of what are certain projects or opportunities within your institution that employers can support with. I talked about financial aid and student scholarships and how employers support Ashesi students with that, some employers. And also you want to look at some projects that they can support with funding or with resources or some of other way that they would want to support, right? There are industry donors or employers who are willing and able to support, but think of what platform or communication have you sent to let them understand what is happening within your institution and giving them the platform to support and the diverse opportunities to support as well. So we can look at that institutional support.
So another way we also engage with employers is also we engage with them to create actually opportunities for students and also alumni. And one of the things we do, let's say, for online on campus recruitment, we have had some organizations that are running initiative like Future Leaders programs. And with this, they are looking for people who are about to graduate or fresh graduates to take through their organization, training them, rotating them around different departments to prepare them for placement within the organization. So we have helped organizations to hire from really young pool of talent, but also we have helped with conducting interviews. So depending on the size of the institution, sometimes they don't have established, let's say, HR department to help with the hiring process. So we work with them to help them identify the potential candidates, then conduct the assessment with them, and then help them choose the candidate. But also, so for organizations that have established HR department, we work with them, let's say, to disseminate the opportunities, the vacancies they have within their organization, to share with our pool of talent from students who are about to graduate, but also those ones who are in the alumni, our diverse alumni network.
Okay, thank you, Carolee. So we're going to go into the pre-session form once again to look at the submissions that came up in the pre-session form. And one of it we looked at, so I mean, most institutions, from what we got from the pre-session form, we're hoping it's the same here. Most institutions are engaging employers in more than 2 ways. So we want to applaud you for that. Hopefully what we've shared will broaden your scope as to what other platforms or ways or techniques can you also start thinking about. I've seen some questions come concerning the career mentoring program, and like I already said, we'll touch on those at the end during the Q&A. I'll be happy to share some more light on how we're doing it, what the challenges are, because yes, there are challenges, but it's about structuring things out in such a way that you're able to overcome those challenges. So I'll share on that. Another challenge that was put in, that came through the pre-session form, was, I think, one person mentioned challenges organizing internships because there's no common framework on the expectations of each party, as the intern, the receiving institution, the university, which makes it difficult to evaluate the outcome. And I just want to go back to what I mentioned at the very beginning, which is that the framework, the learning outcome, that information should come from the institution. Right, you should understand how employer engagement is feeding into your institution's mission and vision, and clearly outline what you want from employers, what kind of experiences and skills you want them to be able to support your students with, what kind of learning outcomes are you hoping to get to support your institution. And so you saw, I presented, I'll present it again, how Ashesi had the 8 learning goals, and with that 8 learning goals, we make sure obviously the learning goals came about through consultation with employers as well, but that's what we run with as Ashesi. And so we make sure that our feedback is feeding directly into that. So they are giving us feedback per those learning goals, but it came from us. So you have to have what your objective is and then reach out to employers with that to get feedback, right? So I think that's what I'll say on that. We also, I think virtual events also was one of the, I think some people mentioned that it was hard because of the pandemic to just handle some of these engagements because everything is done virtually. And just to share a couple of things across Ashesi and Kepler that we're doing that are virtual and they're working. I mentioned the career fair earlier on, that Ashesi did a virtual career fair this year. We used a platform called Career Fair Plus. Yes, it required funding, but Carol is going to share about some very creative way they went about, career fair this year, virtual career fair, which required little or no funding. I learned from that myself. So please share, Carolee.
So as you might all know, like in the past, we have been conducting in-person career fair where we invite really employers on campus to make sure that we create that opportunity for students to interact with employers, but also get opportunity to learn really from the people who will be hiring them once they have graduated, but also kind of employers get to understand the field of candidate the students we have. So when the COVID hit, it came with unprecedented impact on education, and we really had to move. Like, I think most education institutions moved actually to support students remotely, and that was the case with also Kepler. And we had to, at the same time, we wanted to continue serving students to still meet the intended objective that related to conducting the career fair. So with that, we had to find a way of supporting students to run the career fair, creating opportunity for them to engage with employers. So I would say this is something we did. This is something we did as a pilot because it was going to be the first time we are running, and since we have not done it, we're more skeptical to invest a lot of money on something we have not tried out before. So we came up with a strategy on where we used Google Meet to actually run a career fair. So with this, we had to set up, of course, it comes with knowing who is going on the side of employers, who is attending, and then sending the profile of companies which are coming, so students can have that information ahead of time. And then set up, Google Meet, it has no limitation. It's not like time limit. It's not like Google. Zoom. For Zoom, when you don't have a paid account, you cannot manage the process. So we had to create different meeting rooms, and then students actually have access on how to sign up to meet specific employers so they can have discussion with them. Though we had some glitches here and there, but it gave us actually opportunity to learn a few things we could tweak to make sure that next time when we are running a bigger career fair, we can actually minimize those glitches. And this is actually the same approach we are taking when it comes to other engagement like guest speaker series that Abigail mentioned, and also some of information session or bit in class, or even the general guest speaker series. Thank you. So for now, if I can proceed, we want to go a little bit before we can talk about how to conduct outreach with employers. We would love to hear from participants. If there is to shed more light on how they have actually engaged, maybe other innovative ways of engaging with employers. Anyone from the audience, you can raise up your hand.
My experiences, I want to agree with you and Abigail. I sit on a council of a university, so I'm like a board member. So that's my role. But when I'm doing my job, if I find any senior executives that are good for my university, I recommend them to the Vice Chancellor, yeah? So I open the door, yeah? Because sometimes when you are in the university, you don't interact with these people as much as when you're outside the university. So Abigail, I wish just to hear your comment on this. How does Ashesi benefit from relationships that, because you're always in the university and Dr. Aua is in the university and Dr. Angela is in the university. Who opens the doors for you outside the university? When they're just going on in their business, they've finished a meeting and, they meet someone and they say, oh, this person is good for my university. The question is, of course, you can draw a list of people you want to meet, right? Or you can intentionally say, I want to meet so-and-so. Yeah. But I feel there's also another strategy where if you have the right people in the industry or the right people outside Ashesi, they can be your voice once in a while. Why? Because these relationships are more ready. They'll be in a meeting and someone will say, oh, we are looking for a university to engage with on internships. So you're not even going to ask them to get you internships. They are looking. So someone speaks for you in that context. I know alumni really are the best people too, but sometimes they'll not be in the strategic positions. You get my question?
I think that is one of the things we are going to talk about in our next slide.
Yeah.
And Mary Ange?
I think it's about making everybody in the organization an ambassador for all the different industry engagement opportunities that are out there, so that whenever the industry, they have at least key information that they can share, and then they start feeding all the different leads to career services. I should say I'm doing career services at the university where I work, Carnegie Mellon University, Africa. And another thing that we had started doing before the pandemic that seemed to be promising was to start traveling to different countries where we have students that are studying in our university and just hosting a cocktail where you're able to do a presentation, info session on what's going on in the university, the different programs and engagements that we have. And that's a really good type of engagement because now you have different companies present. Some of them are existing partners, some of them are prospective partners, and they're able to discuss among one another and learn from each other. So of course, we've been able to do that in Rwanda easily because that's where we're based, but we wanted to increase the outreach outside of our home country. And another point to make is to involve the faculty as well in those engagements. That's been really good for us because the faculty gets a sense of appreciation for the work that career services does to try to foster these relationships. But also from the perspective of industry, I find that they connect really well to the people that are actually delivering the content to the students. And sometimes when you're talking about fields that are a bit more technical in nature, because at our university, we're offering master's program in IT and in engineering, it's nice to have someone in the room that has that knowledge more in depth, that they're able to touch on those topics with the different guests in the room. So I think that to have a mix of industry, career services staff, faculty it provides a good balance to the conversation. That's it for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marie.
And they have organized programs that engaged industry, trying to encourage them to engage persons with disabilities. So they have practically linked us up with some industries that have actually engaged some of our students in internship programs and in even in job opportunities. So that has worked very well. And two examples they're mentioning, a bank actually intentionally recruits students who have visual impairment every year. For some reason, even this year, our students were not interested, which was sad for me. They came and said, are there any students you can recommend? And none of them were interested in working with the bank. So that was, but then we've also had good working relationships with DFID, for example, who actually came to us and asked for students because of this engagement of the Federation of Persons with Disability. So they've virtually been opening the doors for us in that respect. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Awesome. That's really great. Thanks for sharing that. So we can be very strategic and targeted in terms of even the employers who can support with specific opportunities, looking at the needs of our institution, right? So thank you so much for sharing on that. It was very insightful.
Moving on, we've been talking about employee engagement, how to involve them in our curriculum, but also the other piece we want to also talk about is how do you actually reach out to them to convince them to come on board? How do we do that? Engaging, like having, before maybe I talk into how we do that, it's really relevant to create a channel on how you can constantly increase the number of employers you're working with, because as you know, the labor market is really changing. Like it changes every day. So the more employers you have on board, or the employers you're working with, the more the great opportunity you have to learn what are their needs and then how can you actually address their needs. So at Kepler, to make sure that we can actually have enough support on the side of the careers team, we also we train staff and also students to equip them with networking for the case of staff members and also students, but also job search skills for the case of students. So basically the main objective of this is to make sure that students know how to talk, students and staff members know how to talk about Kepler. And then they also know for students, for example, they know how can they market themselves when it comes to looking for the different opportunities. So we equip them with networking and job search skills to make sure that they can, for staff members, they can use their network to connect us with, because we believe everyone has a network that can actually turn into a potential opportunity for our students, which is the same case with students. But we ask them, once they get these opportunities, we ask them to connect us to their employers so we can actually cultivate the relationship with them. Another thing we do, we conduct the market study. So with the market study we do, we look at, let's say, giving an example from Kepler, Rwandan labor market. Which institutions are hiring? How often do they hire? Who are the key players in the industry? And then we actually target these industries. You remember when I mentioned like top leadership to support with strategic communication? Sometimes you might need to seek support from maybe the person, could be staff member, to help connect to that specific someone, a decision maker from that institution, so we can speed up the process. But we conduct a labor market study to know who are the key players, and then we target them so we can actually have them on board. And another thing we have done, maybe let me use this specific example. When Kepler launched in 2013, we started with competence-based learning, and this was something really new on the Rwandan labor market. Most employers didn't know what is competence-based learning, and then they did not even have the expectation. They don't know what to expect from people who have gone through Kepler. So something we did to make sure that we increase our visibility, but also bring in more employers, is also leveraging employer board. So we created employer board who helped us with creating advocacy, giving us feedback on the curriculum, but also using like spreading the word of mouth with different organizations, let's say their partners, so which helped us actually to increase our visibility, but also different organizations, to learn more what Kepler is about and what to expect from our graduates.
Thank you. Before I go on to the next point, though, I wanted to also touch on the employer board. So Ashesi has about 2 separate communities when it comes to employers. So we have an employers, we call it an employers forum, where we meet with we meet with employers across, all our strategic communications, and then we engage with them. But here specifically, I want to talk about our corporate council, which also does something similar to what Carolee has mentioned. Is we also had a council that we were engaging with, were giving us insights into what was happening in industry and how to incorporate it also in terms of what we're doing. And once again, the word of mouth, as you begin to do, and I think it's leading to my next point, is as you are consistent in the quality of graduates that you are churning out, as you are consistent with excellence in student development, as you're consistent with academic and educational excellence, it just so happens that by word of mouth, parents, employers, just recommendations begin to flow, and then it's easier to get more employers within your database because they can see the results and how it's adding value to industry, right? So you want to understand your strategic brand, right? First of all, what it is and how you're maintaining it, but also communicating that brand. We've talked about communication already. You may be doing amazing and stellar things in your institution, but the fact that you are not communicating it or opening up communication channels with industry in such a way that they can clearly and immediately see the impact and the value that you are churning out as an institution, right? So you want to look at the website, social media. How are you using the institution's website, social media, etc., to communicate, for example, students and alumni success stories? How are you communicating the value that the products of your institution are giving in industry, right? Because employers, when they see that, they feel like, oh, I also want this for my organization. Let me engage with this institution to ensure that I can also get a pipeline of graduates or interns from this place. So how are you communicating the value that your students and graduates are giving at the workplace? And everybody wants an association with a great brand. And so creating that awareness around your brand is also super key in terms of increasing your numbers and employer database. And the last point on this is about how to use, and I think, I'm not sure who mentioned it, but alumni, using alumni as brand ambassadors is really, really important. It's how you can get them to communicate. Is automatically what they're doing at the workplace is communicating your brand. So make sure that they're communicating the right brand for you, but also what are they saying when they get into those organizations? What are they saying for your brand, to promote your brand and to allow for more engagement with you as an institution? And I'm going to give an example. So this is Abdul Latif, and Abdul Latif, he's a gentleman on the far right in the white shirt, and he's a class of 2005, I believe, graduate of Ashesi, one of the first graduates that came out of Ashesi, and he has been very instrumental. So he works with MTN, and he's been very, very instrumental. He's an engineer, so he's not in like HR or anything, but he's been super proactive in making sure that every year he makes sure there's a pipeline of students that are coming into Ashesi. He coordinates with the HR department when they start their hiring. He informs us they are hiring, give us candidates, let's make sure they are in the system. So he's been very, very proactive in that regard. There's all the they're not employers over there. They came through Abdul Latif's initiative, right? He's an alum who made sure that he wasn't alone in terms of getting into the organization, but he was able to pull others along as well. So how are you leveraging on your alumni networks to ensure that your alumni, you are increasing employer database as well? It's also key.
So Abigail, maybe before we move on, okay, there's something I wanted also to add on in terms of alumni. So for us at Kepler, we also track actually alumni data, and through tracking the data, we know where is Carolee working, where is Abigail working, and we use also that information to target. So sometimes maybe not everyone in the alumni might actually connect us to their employers, but we use it as one of the ways to actually target them. And last point, I think it was Mary Ange who talked about like hosting cocktail events in different countries where their students are coming from. I think that is one, I wanted to highlight that because I think that is really a great way of creating visibility for institutions that might not be operating within that country. I think for institutions that receive students from different countries, they might be going through a challenge of employers not knowing, let's say, what is this institution? What should we expect from them? So I think that is really a great point. Thank you, Mary-Ange, to talk about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add, what you just said reminded me that we also actually, admissions team also makes great use of alumni in the various countries on the continent when they go on their recruiting campaigns. So alumni in the countries across the continent are really instrumental in supporting with that. And what sometimes happens is we usually will get someone also from the careers in the past, from somebody from the careers unit also join and talk to alumni to understand, for example, which organizations are key in this country, should we engage with, should we communicate to, which radio stations can we even go and talk and get some more traction in terms of the recruitment campaigns we're about to carry out in that country. So they are very, very instrumental in giving us country-specific context to support recruitment and also development of career relationships with organizations as well. So yes, alumni are very critical and crucial to that process. I see 2 hands raised. Is it if there are questions, if there are contributions for the topic, please go ahead.
Right, Abigail, this is Araba here.
Okay, awesome,
from
you're
Ashesi
here.
University. Yes, and I love the fact that you just touched on the 360 approach. That's how I call it, that when admissions is working, you should look at the end result, okay? When faculty are working, they look at the end result, and it all comes back to us. And that's why we adopted that approach, that when we are recruiting, you're looking at 2 things. People who can afford to bring their children to Ashesi, their wards, whether to pay partial scholarship, full scholarships. But it's these same people who are in positions that may be able to employ them when they're done with their education, or to refer them to some potential employers. And so in all the issues of career and employability of students, I would urge participants to think about the 360 approach and not work in isolation. And I think that's what has worked well for us at Ashesi. So I just wanted to buttress that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Araba. So Araba is our Director of Admissions and Financial Aid, our Executive Director of Admissions and Financial Aid. So thank you so much for buttressing that point, Araba. And it's true in Ashesi, and I see same with Kepler after communicating with Karoli, is that there's a lot of collaboration, right? You can't be an isolated unit to let career services be effective. It has to be a joint effort. It's like someone would say, it takes a village, so you have to be able to grow connections internally and build them also to support with what you're doing in career services and in employer engagement. Thank you, Araba. So the next point, which is also very, very critical to the conversation today, is not just running all these amazing initiatives, is how are you evaluating the success of these initiatives that you are running? How are you creating data and feedback channels also between your university and then employers to understand what is needed to evaluate the success, to see what gaps there are and how you can fill it, and all of that is important. So that's the next thing we're going to look at. And how are you also using that information, that feedback, that evaluation, that when you get the feedback, how are you bringing that back into your institution to make sure that you are using it to update and make your systems and structures work even better for your institution and also for your students? It's very important to know that evaluation must be at the core of the institution's work and programming around employee engagement, and it's used to judge the quality and effectiveness of the programs, the learning activities, and the outcomes, right? It's good to run all these amazing things, but how sure are you that they're actually yielding the results you needed to yield? How sure are you that it's adding value to the employer or to the industry, or how you're thinking? I mean, we can be in academia or institution thinking one thing, and then it's a totally different thing happening in industry. That's why a lot of times we hear that there's a disconnect, there's a gap, between what institutions are doing and the graduates they're training and what is needed at the workplace. It's important to keep communication lines open, feedback channels open constantly, to be able to understand that how what you're doing in the institution is aligning or syncing with what is happening in industry and on the ground, right? It should be something that is planned in advance, right? And it should involve all relevant stakeholders as well. So you need to identify key elements and intended learning outcomes. I mentioned once again how Ashesi has an example is how Ashesi has the learning goals. What are the outcomes you wish to evaluate? You need to understand, first of all, what you are pursuing and what you want to evaluate. And then you need to consider the best way of capturing that information or that feedback, and consider how you're going to do it, and then how you can feed it back into your institution for strategic decision making and program enhancement. So these are the things we're looking at for this particular conversation.
Thank you, Abigail, for that. So to make sure that we do that, what we have done at Kepler and also Ashesi, as Abigail will also be sharing in a few minutes, is that we have actually collaborated with employers to learn their feedback, but also we have also asked students also to give us feedback. So I'm going to explain that. So with employers, when students go for internship, these are people who are working, specifically their supervisors. We ask them to rate our students on different skills, so they can tell us what our students demonstrating well in terms of skills and what areas they need to improve, so we can actually use that information to reinforce our curriculum to make sure that we address the actual needs employers are looking for from our students and also graduates. That is on the side of employers, but on the side of students, we also talk to students to get their understanding, like let's say mainly to understand their readiness. When they went for internship, what challenges did they experience? What kind of support do they need? So with this information is to help us to assess the readiness of students when they are going for internship. And we use this information, one, to customize the support for specific students, and also still to make sure that we reinforce the curriculum, especially looking at the common trends from the feedback students are giving us. And before maybe Abigail jumps in also talk about this feedback is, with getting feedback from students, it's a little bit tricky because at the beginning, this is something we wanted to do. It is helpful for us, but students sometimes, they were reluctant to give this feedback. So we had to come up with more innovative way, which actually motivates them to give feedback at the same time on the side of employers. So as I told you at the beginning, we work with Southern New Hampshire University, which is actually our accredited degree partner. So they are the ones offering the degree. But to make sure that we help students to contextualize what they are learning, but at the same time, we equip them with skills which are really relevant on the labor market. We like from the piece of the feedback from the employers, we use that to develop short courses we call modules. So we set up a minimum requirement that each student has to master before graduation. And these modules, from the internship learning, these students can also get credits which are related to those specific modules, depending on their field of study. So I would give an example. Let's say if I join Kepler to do an internship, looking at my daily task, I'm learning something which could be reflected into module credits. So in order for students actually to seek or to qualify for those module credits, we ask them, first of all, to complete the feedback forms, and also asking the employers to do what? To give feedback, because they are still working with them. So with that, you find that it kind of helped us to to keep the flow of the feedback from the employer side and also student side.
Okay, thank you, Carolee. So with the Carolee presented on the feedback forms, right? What it looks like, what kind of questions go into that. So I'm presenting on the outcomes of that survey, right? We also carried out a survey for our employees, specifically for internships, right? And I've mentioned this already at the beginning. I mentioned it as well. So the chart on the left is for us when we analyze all the submissions that are made by employers. So what happens is the form has to be filled by the supervisor, but it has to be filled with the students as well. So the students signs or appends their signature and the supervisor does same. And so when we collate and we analyze that feedback, this is what it will potentially look like, right? In terms of the y-axis, the vertical axis, you can see our learning goals, the A learning goals: professionalism, communication, teamwork, leadership, innovation, and action-oriented, curiosity and skills, ethics, critical thinking, technologically competent. These are the things that we are very important. They are pillars that drive what we do at Ashesi. And so we have structured the questions that employers are filling to meet or directly sync with these pillars. And so they are rating us. If we say these are the things that we are, pushing in our student development, then they are telling us how well we are doing on that. Are we actually going somewhere? Are there gaps? Are there things we need to change? So with this information, so this is just a part of the report, but it's a longer report that tells us what the gaps are, where we are doing well, we celebrate the successes, and where we are not doing well, we feed back that information back to the community. We have meetings with faculty to tell them this is what employers is saying. What can we do in the classroom to make sure that the areas that we are not doing too well, we can work on those, right? And so we will deliberate and we'll come up with these are things we can do. Faculty moves into what they can do. We look at as administrators, as student services, as all the other units. What is it that we can do to make sure that we are using that feedback to improve student learning outcomes and to improve the work that we are doing in the institution, but also around employability. So you can see the internship. So for example, what is at the bottom right is something that is around performance of students. We tease this out of the report, performance of students across majors compared to, entry-level employees, for example. So if it's something that we feel is not meeting up or matching up, we communicate with the specific major to say, okay, these are things. Our engineering major is one of the newest that we had. We graduated our first cohort in 2019. We've had a lot of communication with employees as to how, in terms of students at the workplace with that information, from engineering, not for full-time right now, for internships. How are they faring? What are the gaps? What do we need to look at? So we are using that to make sure that we are tweaking the engineering program, or at least what lecturers are doing in the classroom. We may not be able to tweak the curriculum immediately, but at least lecturers can add one or two things here and there to make sure that they are matching up to what employers, what's happening in industry, what is happening in the labor market, because they're, like Carolee mentioned, a lot of changes happening all the time, and let's see how we can keep abreast of those changes. And then also curriculum consultation is how are we using that as feedback to, how are using consulting employers to seek feedback on our academic curriculum to ensure that we are offering content and training that is relevant and consistent with what industry needs or what is happening at the labor market.
Thank you. So with the curriculum consultation at Kepler, so there is using employer feedback to create the curriculum, but also there is actually, after creating that curriculum, how do we still go back to the employers, people, our key customers, to actually get their input. So drawing from Kepler's example, like after conducting a labor market study to learn the areas of focus and potential degree program that we can create for our new program that we recently applied to HEC to seek local accreditation on. We developed a curriculum, a program, after which we went back to the employers. From that photo, That was one of the sessions where we're gathering employers' input on the curriculum to see whether the content of the program and also how the pedagogy is actually structured really enhances the practical learning needs, which meets the skill need from on the labor market.
So for Ashesi also, we have the, I mentioned earlier on the corporate council, which is made up of some key industry persons. So we look at the key industries within the country, and we pick up people within top and middle management to advise Ashesi's executive or Ashesi's leadership on where we are headed to and what we can do from the strategic point of view, right? And so I remember maybe 2-3 key ways that they supported. The engineering program, they were very influential in creating and analyzing and evaluating the engineering curriculum. Even before we started running the engineering program in Ashesi, we brought them to campus. We had day-long meetings with them where they were given evaluation, and even breaking into small groups to discuss the program and to give feedback on what are the needs of industry when it comes to engineering, and how is this curriculum meeting that? Not just how are things done as usual, but what can you do differently to make sure that that gap that we've been talking about is closed up. And we also they were also very instrumental in our French program, which we're running now. They mentioned, for example, that our students are great, but for some of the companies, those who have subsidiaries in French-speaking countries, it was difficult to take graduates there because they were not fluent in French. So then we started a French program in Ashesi, which has been working really well. Currently, we are, getting feedback around starting an executive program, and we are, once again back to employers, touching base with them, getting their feedback as to what will appeal to them, what is important to them, and how can we put that within the program, right? So these are all ways where employers support curriculum consultation. Very quickly, because we are running quickly out of time.
So drawing from the pre-session, we really learned that most institutions are using different tracking tools to learn, to collect the feedback. For example, questionnaires, surveys, tracer studies, to get more information or feedback on the employer's evaluation. So I think something I want to put across here, like sometimes you are really ambitious when it comes to the tools you need to use to collect some of this information, but which is really okay. But sometimes it's not about the tool. It's about how can you use the resources at your disposal to make sure that you meet the intended objective. So still through the pre-session form, we also learned interesting, another institution which is really using interesting tool to gather this information. And I'm not sure if Ja is on the call, so he can share he can use 1 minute to shed more light on this tool. Ja, are you on the call?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay, very nice. 1 minute. Okay, so very short. It's a German university, a fully fledged university with lots of student study programs. So our job as a central career service is to cater for all the study programs. So to get employers from all industry sectors. And so we developed a tool, which is actually, it's a very simple Excel sheet, but it helps to keep track mostly about one aspect. So if you did that for many years, this one question, did you cater to all your students from all the different study programs and different entry levels, internships? Did you bring all these offers? We developed a simple tool, which is a lot of work. So it's a simple tool showing in one column all the industry sectors and then specific employers from each sector. What do they offer? How did we contact them? What did we do together with them? Workshops, excursions, job fairs, and so on. and you see also all your study programs in the same Excel sheet, and you can make a cross and see if this employer catered with their offers also for this very study program. So for this one aspect that you have to keep track if all the study programs were served, because otherwise what you end up very easily if you only react and not act is that only those employers come and want to cooperate with you who are in desperate need of specific candidates, mostly those who are sought after most. Like in Germany, for example, it's software engineers. Software engineering students, they don't have any problem. They send one application and they get 3 offers. So we do not have to be kind of a recruiting agency for these employers. We need a diverse pool of employers, and really to build up a diverse pool, we should keep track with what kind of employer, with which offer from which industry sector did we cooperate yet, and do we have to adjust? So that was our approach.
Thank you very much, John. John shared on it. They have an employers matrix. And he shared on that. So I think even before we conclude, it's just to inform you that we'll be having a community virtual meet at 4:30 today to just go a bit deeper in some of these. If you have questions, etc., that couldn't be answered, you can join that and we'll be happy to answer. So John will also be there to share a bit more on the employers matrix and how that works. But I think, Caroline, we can just quickly share on the last one around sustainability, and then maybe have a few questions before we conclude. Yes, sorry, hold on a second.
Sure.
Yes. So, so the last point is looking at all of what we are saying is great, but how are you keeping employers coming back? How are they motivated and committed to your institution? There are so many institutions out there, but how do they select you? Why would they keep coming to you? Why would they engage with your students? Why would they engage with you? What are some of the things you can do from the institution's level to make sure that you are keeping them, not that you're starting engaging with employers, but you are keeping and maintaining and building that relationship to a point where the employers are literally stuck on you and they're not going anywhere. So just going to share very, very quickly, because we're out of time. The first one is how you are managing, keeping communication lines open. We're talking about over and over again, making sure that you become like a trusted partner for them. And over time, that goes into reliability and validity of the relationship that you have with them. You also want to look at keeping employers involved in the affairs of your institution. And I mentioned that earlier on, right? Employers want to be able to easily connect with the institution to provide feedback. I know that, for example, one of our international employees mentioned that they like to engage with us because we have a unit that is quickly and easily responsive when they send information. And so they want that. It makes their work easier. So you want to think about that as well. You want to think about celebrating your top employers, right? How are you, when they're engaging and doing all the right things, how are you celebrating them? How are you maybe giving them like some VIP treatment of a sort? What is VIP treatment for your institution? Are you inviting them for major events on campus like graduation? Are they featured on your website as top employers? Are you celebrating them on social media so that they would want to keep coming back?
Yeah, another thing also is thinking about how do you actually create value for them? It's one thing to engage with them. Like the relationship should not be one-sided, but you should also be thinking about how do you create value for them. Maybe to give an example, with COVID, when COVID hit, many organizations moved to work remotely. But this is not something many people were used to. So at Kepler, something we offered is we offered workshops on how to transition to work remotely, and also offer training around how do you manage a remote team. So in a sense of trying to see how do we support our partners. And then another thing is also to create engagement programs. So it is one thing to think about engagement, but do you have actually activities in place where you create engagement opportunities, where you actually invite them to come? I know when we talk, throughout the convening, we have talked about we need to bring together institutions and also, education institution and also industry practitioners. But sometimes you need to initiate the conversation by having these engagement activities. But also, it's good also to sign agreements like MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, so you can officialize the collaboration with them.
If we have some questions that we can answer, maybe one or two.
And it aligns with one critical point you just mentioned on feedback, and what Ashesi is doing so far in terms of producing the reports on how far, for example, the students that we have sent out there, are they faring compared to those that we are hired outside, that kind of a partnership we have with that employer. One thing I've always kind of struggled with, and I think I've shared this thing with Karoli, is how do we really get these employers to even take that time to fill in those, those surveys? So I wanted to hear what has been like the success rate at Ashesi, and what is that strategy that you really kind of implement to make sure that these employers really take time to really fill in those surveys? Because as you know, sometimes they're like, it's too much work and I have other important things to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I think for us, what I'll say, we get a high success rate. Once they have the link, they're going to fill it. And it's an online link, which makes it easier, for them to fill in. But I think what is most important to note is that they see, our communication with the employers is constant. It's always ongoing. We communicate with them what challenges we've identified in our students per their feedback. We communicate with them what we are doing with that information. We communicate with them when we implement it and the kind of results that we are seeing as a result of that. So when they see themselves situated within that process, that my feedback moves from me and this ends up here, that means that anytime they get opportunity to give feedback, they would, because they can see visibly that it is being instrumental in the affairs of the institution and into the results that are being churned out. Right. So anybody who sees that wants to be associated with that kind of. So I think it's more of us making sure we are communicating constantly to them in that regard, for them to see how essential their feedback is. And at the end of the day, if you know that the feedback is going to result in the kind of interns and products and graduates that you are going to get for your organization, and it's going to impact the value of the work that you are doing in your organization, you would want to be a part of that process. They just need to understand, what they are doing and why they are doing it.
Thank you so much, Abigail and Karoli. Really quite informative. Thanks.
Yeah, hello. Thank you. I think I'm really learning a lot. I just, we're talking about educational institutions, and we're talking about industries, and we talked about internships. So I'm also trying to look at the role of the regulatory bodies, from leaving school, going through your internship. I think the professions councils, like the regulatory bodies, I think they should have a bigger role here, because before they even are, the graduates are allowed to work in the industries, most of these professional bodies probably will need to make sure you are qualified to be registered before you can even practice. So I don't know whether these bodies also have a role to play in what we are discussing.
Maybe this might be slightly different from because looking at the major, and also, some majors have regulatory bodies. Let's say people who might be majoring in something related to, let's say, healthcare, let's say doctors or lawyers here in Rwanda. So before you can actually start operating as a lawyer, you need to go through a given, let's say, you have to go through a given testing. So it's more like another exam you have to go through. So I feel, yes, they need to play a part, especially on the side of creating awareness, to inform employers and also actually inform the education institutions that might not be doing this, that actually our graduates need to get the foundation experience that actually the employers need to make sure that they can actually launch their careers. So yes, it is a collaborative effort which different stakeholders need to buy in and also contribute to.
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Peter. That was a very good question. Even in terms of, we talked about collaboration, very key internally, even externally, right? Even policymakers and government, and they're all part of the conversation. We cannot do this in isolation. They have to be part, and that's why we are very grateful for initiatives like the Education Collaborative that intentionally brings them and adds them to the conversation. We may not be able to, as let's say Ashesi alone or Kepler alone, be able to enforce certain policies, but together, as we come together, we have a bigger voice, a stronger voice to impact, what policies are created around education and how it benefits the cause of, what we're doing, employee engagement, in collaborating across institutions, etc. So yes, those bodies or those regulatory bodies are very much part of the conversation. And I think maybe institutions also have to look at how we can also be a bit more intentional in involving them in employee engagement conversations. So thank you. That's something I have personally noted as well.
Yeah. I would like to say thank you so much. It was really interesting to get the input from the participants, and we are even though we're also facilitating, we also actually got opportunity to learn from the participants, and we're actually looking forward to continue learning as we engage again at 4:30 GMT today.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining. Please do join us at 4:30. Let's have a great conversation there as well.